You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey everybody, it's Dale Sellers with 95 Network. I'm the executive director here, and I'm so thankful that you're joining us today for another podcast. Got a friend from Sacramento, California with us today who's going to share with us some things that's happening in his life and what God is doing. And his name is Daniel Houk. Did I do it?
Was
that close? Yeah.
It's not Hulk.
It's not Hulk. And I was telling you off mic, I said, here in South Carolina, we're big Clemson fans, and it's Clemson, but most people call it Clemson with a P, and there's really not a P in there. And I didn't want to add the L to Hulk.
You did great.
Well, thank you, man. I'm so glad you're joining me today. Tell me a little bit about who is Dan? What's it like being a Sacramento guy?
It's funny. On the West Coast, we get a lot of people thinking, "Oh my gosh, what it's like that! It's some sort of dystopian, zombie apocalypse out here." And
well, we honestly in South Carolina, we keep waiting for y'all just to fall off into the ocean. But you have
that's right. Yeah, and we're long overdue for the earthquake that will do that.
Yes.
Yeah, we are probably a lot like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the same kinds of problems, and what makes the news is probably really not what we're like. I mean, there's that. We have a homeless issue in certain big cities. We have, we've got a lot of problems and people in great need, but people are people. Yeah. And they need the same things here that they do in North Carolina or Ohio or anywhere else. So,
well, I know you said you were just recently in North Carolina. I live in South Carolina. What part of North Carolina were you recently in?
I was near Asheville, the Bon Clarkin Conference Center.
Oh, see, that's an hour from where I live. I live in Greenville, South Carolina, so it's literally an hour from there. So you were pretty much, did you think you're like going on to heaven? I mean, once you came through here?
I got to say, it was beautiful. I mean, I was telling people there that it's very hilly and a lot of trees here in North California too, but they're usually on fire. That's the only so.
Oh, Lordy. Well, one of my joys of being part of 95 Network, and in the first 10 years that Gina and I were married, we traveled on the road with music groups. But it's just being able to see this vast country, America, and it has so much different geography and different climates and things about it. But, it's an amazing country. And you live in another great part of it. It's so beautiful out there. What I'd love for you to do is just take a moment and tell us your story. I know you've been in ministry and experienced a lot of cool things. Just kind of walk us through, your life, if you would.
Sure. I actually do a quick testimony, but I was actually raised Hindu, which you might expect out here in California.
Yes, see, that fits perfectly.
A little different. I got saved, accepted Christ through reading a Bible that someone had dropped off at my house, an evangelical.
Wow. And
that was in my my early 20s. I was married at the time, got married very young. And so, just started following the Lord, got involved in a church and felt a call to ministry. My wife at the time came to Christ. And so went to Bible college, came back. I served at the church for a few years, but then ended up getting back into the regular work world. Left the ministry just because I felt like my marriage wasn't quite where it needed to be.
And ministry had a negative toll on your marriage.
Well, I think so. And I just think there were some issues going on in our marriage that came out around the time that I started getting into ministry.
Gotcha.
And so we served always, though, in the church. We were always involved. The kids were involved. And sadly, I ended up going through a divorce after 25 years of marriage. So something I never expected.
Sure.
And I was positive, as far as getting back into ministry someday, that was done. That would never happen in my mind, right? So I started going to a church in Northern California. It's a very large church called Bayside to rebuild my life, make some friends. And in the process of being there and kind of rebuilding and healing from the divorce, I was asked to work with a group, kind of a niche of 40s and 50s adults, single adults in our church. And I after 3 asks, I said yes the third time. And I was in sales, so I was traveling a bit, and it was a little taxing, but I started serving in that ministry. I'd met another woman who was also very involved in serving, named Teresa. And so we basically launched this ministry. It was about 35 adults at the time. And we got married a year later.
Cool.
And God just blessed everything that we did. And I have no other explanation because I know myself. It's clearly not my skill level. And the ministry just grew to, at one point, I think 2 years in, it was running about 250 adults coming every week.
Now, this is a ministry inside the church. This is not a separate church.
Correct.
Yeah.
It wasn't parachurch. It was inside the church. And then, I eventually took over the entire ministry. There was a lot more things we did. And I did that for several years.
What was the main focus of the ministry that you were doing?
It was single adults. So from 20 somethings all the way up to 80 somethings.
It's the hardest ministry there is, in my opinion. I've been serving in the church for 40 years, and to me, doing singles ministry is so complicated because everybody's story is different. Everybody's age is different. Some people are single because they've never been married. Some have been through divorces. Some have had a spouse die, and so you especially would know, putting that together. That's a hard ministry to build, and then to get it to have traction to keep going. So I'm really interested in hearing how this worked.
Yeah, it is. I learned a lot about singles ministry, especially being single. God took me through that season. And one of the greatest needs that a single has, it doesn't matter what your background is or how you are there as a single, you need community. You desperately need community. Isolation is a huge problem. And so having a place that you can go, that you can depend on, having a group of friends that you feel connected to do life with, it's critical.
And I want to ask you this question as we dive into this, and I'm sorry for interrupting there because you're making me think about stuff. So a lot of people in like the 80s and the 90s who wanted what you just described would join a singles ministry. And I don't know another way to say this. It was kind of like it was a meat market. It was there just so you could find somebody to marry or date or whatever. But people have needs much more beyond looking for. In fact, some people maybe not looking for anybody right now because they just either became single or dealing with it. Did you see that to be the case too?
Yeah. Like you said, back then it was the bar, it was the match.com, it was the everything, right? So we have all those other things now. So singles ministries shrunk a lot just because of the diversity of opportunities for singles. But again, they still had that need. And I would say the number one felt need obviously is connection. But if you really asked singles, 95% of them, you asked the question the right way, 95% would say, I want to be married again. Yes. So it's a high
or for the first time.
Or for the first time. Correct. So singles will, like, if you say, hey, do you want to be married? They may say no. But if you were to say, hey, if you met the right kind of person and you clicked with them, would you want to be married? Yeah. So there is a deep need for singles to find connection, number one, but a spouse, if that's a possibility also. And so I think it's still a part of the reason why singles get together. They want community, but in the back of their mind, they really would want to be married again.
Well, if you're a strong believer, and especially if you have not been married,
right?
Where do you go to find someone who has your values?
Yeah.
And one of the, as I talked to you the first time we talked, months ago, I recognized, singles ministries have pretty much gone away, but the need for singles ministry has never been greater than today. And so that was one of the reasons I want to have you on, is because we have a lot of small and mid-sized church pastors listening right now. And this is not something that needs to be ignored. This actually could be an open door to really ramp up and connecting with people who need community.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Dale. I did some breakouts at some conferences we had. One year I talked about how to have a singles ministry in your church, and I had 2 pastors come to it. And the next one I retitled it, how to activate half of your church to become loyal, thriving, serving members of your church. And it was filled.
I bet it was.
And the reality is, singles are usually about half the church. So
Yes.
unmarried people are half the church. And most pastors don't realize that because they know a lot of married people. They're married themselves most. And they look out in the congregation, they think about marriage, they talk about marriage a lot. But if that's the only message that's coming from the pulpit, single people do feel left out and not thought of.
Oftentimes I had a young, just to make that point, I had a young person that was in our youth group when I was a youth pastor many years ago. And I was talking to her particularly one day, and she said, I don't like to come to church on Sunday morning. I don't like our pastor. I'm going, why? She said, because he never talks about us. Every example he gives, I can't relate to. He never relates to us unless he's putting us down. And I think about specifically today in the singles community, the examples are not about being single. The understanding is not about what it's being single. And here in the South, especially, I don't know what it's like on more in your part of the country, but we're just now in the last 10 years getting over staring at people like, oh, you're divorced. Well, God can never use you again, kind of thing. We're beginning to understand that, hey, there is life after divorce. And we need to be aware of that in the church and take care of these folks. So I'm really looking forward to some of the advice you give us today. And the reason you're on the podcast is you have all the answers. And so that's why we have you here.
Yes. And if I don't, I'll make something up. But
I'm going to give you your email.
I have had the blessing of having gone through it and actually led a ministry that grew. So at one point, our ministry grew to over 1,000 people a week coming.
Unbelievable.
So we had different ministries. But that just shows you the need,
yes,
right? And the crazy thing was that our church experienced a kind of not a revival, but they experienced the benefit of a bunch of loyal people who were coming to ministry and saying, "Hey, I've got extra time. I want to serve." They don't have to ask anybody. They don't have to, they have a schedule that's different than a lot of married people. And they served at very high levels all over the church, and it impacted the church. And so
you were part of how large was your church at that time?
I think at the time we were probably running around 10,000.
Okay. So this is a mega church with 10,000 people, and 1/10 of them are involved in what you're doing. And the reason I want to say this is because most of the people listening obviously aren't at churches of 10,000, but the percentages would be the same.
Correct.
So if you have a church of 200, you've probably got 20 singles that you can tap into and get the same results, if you will. And again, I'm not saying that in the wrong way, but just opportunities for people to serve that Dan had in his church. So don't discount the fact that he said, oh, we had 1,000 people. He's not bragging. He's just telling you there's this possibility of something we're not tapping into. So keep on rocking and rolling there.
So let me give you a good practical example of this. So we were called out of that ministry to Southern California to launch a campus for Shadow Mountain. Okay. And so we went to the San Diego area, and they had small groups going. They had different kinds of ministries going. It was a church of about probably 200 when I got there. And so one of the things we saw is we did see a few of the single people. Now think about, again, the stats, right? There's a good number of singles in that congregation.
Yes.
And so we decided, we're going to do an event. So we'll just do an event for singles. We did an event. We advertised it around town, and we had like 65 people come to this event. And out of that event, we just invited, hey, if you want to come to our house, we're going to have a little gathering for singles. So we had 25 people come to the house, and that started a ministry at our church, a singles ministry. And what we saw before was people, in church talking to different people, but all of a sudden you saw the singles gathering together, connecting with each other, doing things outside the church, and serving at a very high level. Populating the kids ministry, populating the greeting team, the Sunday morning services, and the net effect was connecting them. It made them happier, and then more people came to the church as our church grew and that ministry grew. And so it's not just something for mega churches. It's something for every kind of church. We have something for singles. They will respond and they will appreciate it. They're very loyal.
And it's got to be leader led. In other words, you can't have a singles ministry you do honestly, you shouldn't be doing anything just on the side. One of the problems we have in the small church space is we do 20 things poorly instead of 1 or 2 things really well.
Right.
And I can tell you right now, the pastors that are listening now, if you would develop a really powerful singles ministry, but you've got to buy into it. You've got to believe in it. If you don't believe in it, if it's something you do as just as a side gig, it's never going to gain traction. And I want to say that's also true for anything you do.
Right.
Whether it's children, youth, whatever. But there's great benefit because the need is astronomical in this
Right.
space. So I know you wrote a book about all this,
Yes.
So let's kind of dive into what's the book called, and I'll put a link on the show notes.
There we go. It's called Intentional
Relationship.
Relationships
Okay.
for Singles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a 12-week study. We have a website, intentionalrelationshipsolutions.org,
Okay.
that you can go to, and it has videos for every chapter. So it's pretty easy. And there's a leader guide you can download that tells you as a leader kind of how to guide discussions.
Oh, that's
and
really
the design
cool.
of it, what was that?
I said, that's really cool.
Yeah, we made it as easy. Like I made it as easy as I would want it to be.
Good.
So,
Good.
but the design really is for singles to gather together and go through a curriculum that will help them in every area of their life. So this intentional relationships concept is that one of the issues that some singles face, or actually a lot of singles, is, man, I'm struggling to get into a relationship that might lead to marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that this book is all about marriage, but seeing how that is really one of the number one felt needs of a single, we wanted to provide something for them. And while I was in the singles ministry, we had over 100 marriages during my tenure come out of it. And to my knowledge, one divorce. And I keep up with a lot of them. And if you think about the national averages, some of those were first marriages, but many were second.
Sure.
That just destroys the national divorce average, right? So there was something good about this, about preparing people to have healthier relationships. And in the process, the people that met each other that wanted to date and take that relationship further were far more successful than they had been before they came in. See, this was written basically because we had a divorce care program. People came into the ministry and we saw a lot of dysfunction in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, let's have a class on relationships. So we started it, and this is many iterations later, but this is kind of the culmination of how do you have a healthy relationship with the opposite sex, with friends, with family. And that's kind of the gist of the book.
Here's what I want to do. I'm going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want you to dive into what you cover. You said there's 12 chapters or 12 focuses.
Yes.
Yeah. If we'll have to blow through it, but I want to at least cover at least the topics of this. So the short break, we'll be right back. Well, welcome back, guys. We're here with Dan, and I'm really intrigued to learn about the book. Is it called Intentional Relationships?
Intentional Relationships for Singles.
For Singles.
And we kind of break it down into 4 sections. It's 12 chapters, but we talk about it's prepare, plan, pursue, propose, right?
I hear you.
And
so
so
you have an end game in mind that they actually do that. This is revolutionary singles ministry here.
It is. And we tell people, hey, not everybody's going to get married. And we believe in being comfortable in your singleness. We think that if you're single, it's not a scarlet letter, because Jesus was single, Paul was single. I know we know that God uses singles, and there's a theology of singles in 1 Corinthians 7.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a high value. However, God also highly values marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so what better gift we could give to a single to say, here's a great roadmap to help you have a great, healthy relationships.
So walk us through the chapters. You got 4 sections. What's in section 1?
So prepare really is getting yourself ready for relationships.
Okay.
So how do you start off right so that you're ready for a relationship, because you bring yourself into every relationship. And I had a series of failed relationships after my marriage. So my marriage failed. And I actually ended up going to counseling and talking to the counselor. And I asked him, like, is there only crazy women out there? What's the deal? And he said, what's the common denominator? And I didn't want to admit it, but I was the common denominator.
Oh,
right?
So maybe there's not them, huh? Now,
right?
I want to ask you this earlier, and I forgot to. How long were you from the time you divorced to you remarried? How much time was in that space?
Let me see. It would have been about just about 5 years.
That's really good. And I asked that, and I don't. This is just a statistic that I've heard. So I'm not saying this has to be the case, but I've often heard that around 66%, 70% of people who remarry too quickly end up divorcing again because they haven't worked through the issues that happened. And again, divorce is a two-way street, but they haven't worked through the issues that they had to work through. So this process you have, this teaching you have, this class you have helps people do that. So the first section.
True.
Keep on going.
I would say the same thing's true of somebody who loses a spouse. If they get into a relationship too soon, it can be the same issue. And relationships provide something, like when you begin to get in one, you get the butterflies, you get the excitement.
Sure.
They provide something that feels really good that someone who's been hurt needs.
Yeah.
So there's almost a natural draw to get into a relationship, even though it's probably not the best thing for you if it's too soon.
Yeah.
So so the prepare part is really getting yourself ready, and it's understanding, starting with, okay, what happens in the breakdown of a relationship? Like what's going on in it? So we kind of uncover 4 areas that you need to look out for that probably happened in a previous relationship that ended. And then the next chapter is, let's talk about God, because that is our number one intentional relationship. Like he's definitely intentional with us. He pursues us. He does certain things that provide value to us. And then we in turn have a reciprocal relationship with him where we respond to him. We give back to him, right? So if you understand the relationship with God and you establish that, that's going to be the foundation for everything else that comes. And then chapter 4 is really understanding who you are. It's like, okay, who has God made me to be? Because if you're going to get in a relationship with somebody, you want to make sure you understand, like, if one of your greatest needs is quality time, you're not going to marry an over-the-road truck driver, right? So
that's not going to work.
Guy who's gone. And everybody has different needs, and everybody has different gifts and abilities and things they should be doing with their life that a relationship could change. So you want to make sure that you're in a relationship with the right kind of person for who you are, who God's called you to be.
So that gets you to the first section, or is there still one more?
Yeah, that's the first section. So that's the.
Is that more of a kind of inward focused kind of thing? Getting you.
It is definitely inward focused, and then it kind of ends with appreciating the opposite sex. So like let's just talk about the opposite sex a little, because sometimes there's some common misconceptions between men and women, and I hear guys saying like women are all like this or men are all like that, and in some ways we are all like that, right? But in other ways it's just maybe somebody has represented the male of the species in a certain way, or women. But God has designed us differently. So we really talk about that design.
Cool.
And in a relationship, a marriage, that design plays out beautifully if you understand it. So the next thing is plan. And that's really great. How do I plan a relationship so that we get the most fulfillment out of it together? It's mutually.
Is this section 2?
Section 2.
All right.
And it's really talking about boundaries, working through conflict well, building a friendship in a way that's God honoring and smart, just wise, right? So that's the next 4 chapters. And then pursue would be the dating chapter. So what do you do to have guardrails in your dating life, to be smart about how you're getting to know somebody? When red flags come up, how do you discuss and work through red flags or yellow flags or things that might be a cautionary thing that comes up in a relationship, and when you might need to end a relationship? And then the last thing, obviously, propose. And it's kind of interesting, a lot of people don't think about the proposal period, but when you're engaged, especially if there's stepkids involved, or it's complex. So you really need to think through the engagement period so that you set yourself up for a lifetime of pursuit, a lifetime where you're building this relationship, not just it's done and now we're married, right? But how do we set things up so we go forward from here on out and it just gets better and better and better and better?
All right. I want to dive into something. I have never asked this of anyone, certainly not on a podcast, and I'm not trying to stir the pot. I really want to see if you can help me understand. So I have an opportunity to minister to lots of folks, and I have all these couples that have been living together for years, Christian couples living together,
Right.
And then they plan this, extravagant wedding. And like I'm one couple I'm thinking about, they've been living together for 7 years, and then they start talking like it's it's like they're doing it what I would call the right way. Now,
Yeah.
help me understand this mindset. And again, I'm 60 years old and I don't get it. I don't understand how Christian couples can live together. I know the culture accepts that, but and then I don't understand. Here's what I say: I don't understand why are you getting married. You're already. I mean, what else is there to do? Can you help me understand that, or am I just crazy?
It's interesting. We had, I was a part of, during my singles tenure, adult ministries where I also ministered to married couples. So one of the areas we focused on was blended families. And I remember having a dinner and we had these blended family couples in the room. And I was sitting at a table, I would speak and get down, sit. And one of the couples at our table were kind of quiet. And all of a sudden, we feel kind of guilty. Like we're not married. We've been together for 12 years. We have 4 kids, but we never got married.
Wow.
And we said, well, what's stopping you?
Yeah.
And they said, it's just kind of expensive. And so we said to him, what if we did it right here in this room? Like, what if we pitched in and all of us in the room, we had a wedding for you. And really you do that? So we did, super on the cheap. We set up the room. We had a wedding, we had a few pastors around to do the, officiating.
Sure.
And they got married. Didn't cost a lot, but they just wanted to make official what they felt in their heart. But you and I both know that marriage is a thing. It's a commitment.
Yeah.
It's not a piece of paper. It's a union that you're committing to, right?
A covenant.
It's a covenant.
A covenant.
So if you're living together, you've never established the covenant. I mean, you may think you have, but you haven't. In God's eyes, you haven't established a covenant. And the other thing about living together is you're actually setting yourself up for failure. There's something about living together that sows the seeds of a lack of commitment. So living together, failure rate is like 80%.
Sure.
It's worse than a second marriage, which is around 60%. So why not get married? Now, the expense of it, I think that's a personal decision.
Sure.
If you want to celebrate, hey, we're going to do things God's way right now, great. But I definitely don't think it's a necessity. I think you could do justice of the peace just as easy and make it official, right?
I just think I had 3 daughters and I grew up with 2 sisters. And so from a girl's perspective, I just feel like that the ladies are selling themselves short when they allow someone to move in who, basically gets all the benefits of being married, but no commitment there. But again, I'm old fashioned and I'm constantly trying to learn and relate because I'm not judging these couples. I want to minister to these couples. I want to help understand that mindset.
It's interesting because I've delved so deeply into singles and the dating world. Here's what I see happening now. And it's kind of sad. It breaks my heart a little bit because just what you said is true. I think women sell themselves short.
Yeah.
And the women, especially in middle age, they're becoming the sexually active ones. They're the ones that are driving the sexual relationships. And I know what they want. Security. They want commitment, and they think this is the ticket. This is the currency I have to give to get commitment. And so, okay, I'll have sex with this person. Now we're living together, and it feels to them like they have a committed relationship, but they don't. Men, on the other hand, it sounds weird, but by and large, as a rule, men control the relationship, women control the sex.
Absolutely.
So it's 2 different kinds of currency.
A bunch of guys just drove off the road going, amen.
Yeah, I mean, it's
just the way life
reality,
is,
right?
Yeah.
You can say all you want, but the men control the relationship as far as the commitment to it. The women control the sex. There's a study that was done in universities, and it didn't matter whether it's Christian or not. Universities where people were getting married out of them that had more women than men had less marriages coming out of them. So if there were a higher number of women than men, then there was more sex going on outside of marriage and less marriages. The ones where there were even numbers of men and women, it was about the same issue. But the schools where there was more men than women, there was more marriages and less sex. And it's because the currency, like I said, that women have is sex, and the currency the man has is a relationship. So if a man wants a relationship with a woman and the woman will hold out and stay pure, which is God's design, and wait for marriage, then I think they may find they get more commitment out of the guys.
That's so
But if they're
good.
giving it away, then the guys don't have to they don't have to spend
That's
that
so
currency of
good.
relationship commitment.
Have you read or have you kept up with, I think it's Edmund Edridge. I know I said his name wrong, but he did the thing on love and respect.
Yeah.
Dude, I remember this has been 20 years ago probably that I heard him first on Focus on the Family and just talking about basically here's what happens. Men are not naturally wired to give love, but they give respect. And so in the locker
Right.
room, we don't care if you love us, but we want you to respect us. Women are not naturally designed to give respect, but they give love. So when a man withholds love, then he gets disrespected and he gets this negative cycle.
Yeah.
And I see this happening. I hurt for, and again, I'm in relationship, friendship with a lot of these couples, and I would never judge them. I want to be there for them. I don't want to shut the door, close the door on, but I
Right.
feel so sorry for these girls because there's that, this, you probably won't agree with this one. They lose their leverage.
It's
You know what I'm
true.
saying? In relationship, maybe
No,
that's
it
not,
is true.
hopefully that's not too ungodly to say that, but
There's a secular book out that it's called Datonomics, and he looks at dating from an economic standpoint, and it's true. That's just how it works. And if women are willing, here's the thing: at some level, you have to trust God,
yes.
and God may not give you what you want. It's sad. We live in a broken world. I saw this quote one time where somebody was talking about, they hadn't been married and, why would God do this? And I thought this was the best perspective. Someone's saying, is it possible that God's just as upset about this as you are? I think sometimes people who are single feel like God's punishing me or God doesn't like me, or why is God allowing this? And we live in a broken world.
Yes.
There is sickness, there is disease, there's war, and there's relationships where people want to be married and they're not. And I don't think God's any more happy about that than he is war or anything else that's going on.
That's so good.
It's time for us to stop, beating ourselves up and realize we live in a broken world, but we can do things the way God has called us to do things and see the best possible outcome for our lives and trust him.
That is so good, Dan. I say often in our leadership that we live in the residue of the seeker and the attractional church movements. And what I mean by that is, we're just used to saying, if we do the right thing, we do the right light show, we do the right thing, we're going to get all these people. And when it comes to marriage, if you have the right job, you do the right thing. There's no box to put God in.
Right.
And there's no box that life functions in. And so I'm so thankful that you address this. Before we run out of time today, I want you to just give us some ideas of the value of creating a singles ministry and how to do that. I want you to sell this today. Okay. I'm giving you this platform. I want a bunch of churches to get on board with this because this is the most unministered to group in my mind in the country today. Help us understand why it's vital that we provide ministry here in these arenas.
Okay. It's easier than you think. I'm going to give you a quick why. Do you want people that are loyal to your church? Do you want people that are going to serve at higher levels than married couples can serve? Do you want people that can give on a dime without asking anybody else for permission, can go on a mission trip, can do all kinds of things? Those are the singles often. So there's single moms and single dads. Sometimes there's constraints, but often they're the single people in your church. And they're often overlooked, and it's easy. Like a couple of weeks ago, our pastor was preaching on the church I go to is much more like American church now. I go to a church of about 250, 300.
A normal church.
And he was preaching, and it had to do with marriage, but it didn't have to only be about marriage. So I said, well, what about singles? And this is a single issue. He goes, you're right. So he put that in his message, talked about singles in his message. And we had some single people that knew us that happened to come to that church service to visit that day. And they go, you know what? I love your pastor. I just felt so honored that he talked about singles. So I'm just saying, super simple to make them feel honored. Put it in your messages sometimes. If there's something you're talking about marriage, think about how does that also apply to singles?
So that was the point I was making earlier with my young person. She was like, he never talks about anything we're going through.
Yes.
So that's good.
Totally. So that's one. Now having a ministry for them, singles ministry sounds kind of daunting. And whenever people talk about singles, like, oh, they're the, you get the oddball singles sometimes or whatever. And we're all odd in this spectrum, right?
Yes,
we all got
are.
our stuff. Yes. But the reality is you can do simple things like having a small group. Like one of the things we say about this book study is that you could actually do that book study and that could become the nucleus of what you'd call a singles ministry, but maybe it's just a small group. Mm-hmm. You got a church of 100, eight people is your singles ministry. And that would be a huge success, right?
Yes. And that was why I asked you to share that earlier. It's just percentages, don't get caught up in whatever the numbers are. This is the chance to help people.
Right. So I would say that's the number one thing. Another thing that's sometimes a little harder, but I would say is important. If you don't have a man to be involved in the quote singles ministry, I think it's going to be hard to get something significant for singles going. And I'm not sexist or misogynist or anything like that. There are
you need to dive into this when you open a can of worms now.
There are some women that do a great job. And I know one personally, the co-author, phenomenal leader. Like you could put her somewhere. She would have a lot of guys involved because she knows guys. She knows, like, ask them to do something, get them involved. And but a lot of times what will happen is a woman will want a singles ministry started and she'll say, let's do it. And you'll have 8 women. That'll be the singles ministry. It'll be a women's ministry. Mm-hmm. And a guy will come into a room of 8 women. He goes, I'm not sure if I want to go to this women's group. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's just kind of a practical thing. If you want men in your group, you kind of have to have a man involved somehow. So if you're a pastor, you just doesn't mean you have to go to every session or whatever, but just make sure that your congregation knows you're for this. And maybe you poke your head in every once in a while, or you're the one that announces it. And you say, I would love for you single guys to be involved in this. And then you could start a small group that would have a healthy number. I would say healthy number of men to women ratio would be 2 to 1. That's a good singles ministry ratio. 2 women to 1 man.
2 women. Okay, good. Well, most guys looking for the future. That's a good odds.
It's as you age, it changes. The ratio gets larger, right? So if they're young people, you might have a 1 to 1. If it's much older, you might have a 4 to 1.
I'm sorry to interrupt you because you just made me think of something. So let's just say you have a church that's got 20 people under 40 and 30 people over 50. Should they have 2 different groups?
Yes.
Okay. Dive into that.
Ideally, what happens if it's an older group with a few younger people, it ends up being only an older group over time.
Yeah.
So I would say, yes, if you can split it up and have something for different people, but you might also, I believe, depending on the size of your church, that you could do separate things, but every once in a while you bring everybody together for something. And then what that does is it helps for when people may need to transition to a different age group. Mm-hmm. They already know some people from the age group. So
I just think I know with my father-in-law passed away a couple of years ago, and my mother-in-law she's on up in years now, and so her whole life is church. Yeah. Her whole life, and their church is a traditional church, so it's their Sunday school class. But in so many ways, it's just a singles class, and but the needs that they have versus the needs of someone in their 40s or whatever who's still looking to maybe remarry one day are totally different. And so that's why I wanted you to kind of dive into that. If possible, it really is good to kind of have 2 tracks. There's what I'm
sure. Yep.
Cool. Yep. Okay. So what else does a pastor need to do to develop this incredible opportunity to minister to people?
I would say if you have a board, if you can have a single person on your board, just think about the areas of the church where you're putting resources or effort to try and make sure you're including singles. I also believe it's important for singles to be with married people. You don't want to just always isolate the singles completely.
Sure.
But you just want to make sure you're talking to them, you have something for them. And every once in a while, if you're doing marriage events and other kinds of events, maybe have a singles event. And if you want ideas for that, reach out to me.
I'm assuming you're going to be a great resource. So we've talked through the elements of the book, the different sections, this kind of thing. Is there anything today that I haven't asked you about or that's burning in you that we need to dive into before we run out of time?
No, I just feel like we just live in a culture that's so dramatically different than it was even 20 years ago, that the things we take for granted, that we assume everybody knows, they don't know anymore. And I think it's especially true of men and women. We're trying to have healthy relationships, but even the discussion about what a man is and I mean, we have to address all those things in
Yes.
singles ministry.
Mhm.
You just do. So it's a complicated, it's maybe a longer conversation, but I think it's something that once you dive into and you will be glad you did, because you'll see the benefit not only of healthy marriages potentially coming into your
Mhm.
church,
Mhm.
but also just the way singles love to serve and love community. So,
Wow. Well, I one of the things we're all working through right now is as we record this, it'll air sometime in December of 2022. I do not say we're post pandemic, because
right.
I don't believe we are post pandemic. I believe the pandemic has been the greatest gift the church has ever seen. I know I
Yeah.
just made people run out of the road, but I do believe that, because we were already headed in a wrong trajectory. Recently, I wrote an article on our blog, and it was called 7 Years in 7 Weeks. And I believe what happened was, when they asked us to shut down and not meet together for a while, I think we discovered in 7 weeks where our church was going to be in 7 years. And right now with 95 Network, we're ministering to pastors, we're ministering to leaders, and I have not seen this amount of not just discouragement and depression or things like that. I have not seen this amount of really not knowing what to do, of really not knowing how to connect with people. Before the pandemic, you could just ignore the whole singles thing. It didn't matter because you still had your little group of people. Well, a lot of them haven't come back.
Right.
And so the reason I wanted to have you on is this is a great opportunity to do a reset and get refocused and begin to reach a very large segment of our society. Does that fire
I
you up?
Yeah, I am fired up. In fact, I had a long conversation with our senior pastor yesterday, and I do think the reset has got to force us to focus on what we assumed was working wasn't.
It wasn't.
We discovered
It
that.
wasn't.
And I think one of the things we thought is, if we run this play, everything will go on forever. And the play is, you have a great Sunday morning service, you have a few ministries. And I think that is
Blown
all,
up.
as important as it is.
Blown up.
I think the thing we didn't focus on that was way more important was building relationships, getting to know people, connecting to people, spending time, investing in people, and less on the programming, more on the people. That personally, I think that's the shift that I've seen that God's doing is we're not going to get people back into church unless we have a relationship with them.
Is
I mean,
that
the ones
not
the
the
ones that are in
weirdest?
church are generally the ones that were already more committed to begin with, or that we had relationship with. I
Is
think
that
that's
not the weirdest statement you could ever make? I mean, I look at some of the things we're recognizing now, going, "Oh man, I think what we need to do is minister to people." Okay,
yeah.
where did we miss this?
What a crazy thought.
What a crazy thought. What a thought that we should actually care about people and the programming. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we live in the residue of the attractional and the seeker movements. And I don't want to be negative about those, because they were trying to reach people, but
Right.
really it became about the production. It became about the show. It became, and we lost relationships in it. And I will tell you this from our perspective at 95, what we've seen is that the churches that were already very relational have done quite well and are coming back very strong. And the churches who weren't, because I see, because we work with a lot of older traditional churches, and many of them they are so perplexed why the key older folks have not come back to church.
Yeah.
They don't get it. Well, it's because they recognize, you know what? I've been out of church for 2 years and nothing in my life's changed.
Yeah.
And that's what's terrible, is because we should all recognize, hey, wait a minute, I missed this relationship. And I'll be very honest with you. What got us through, our family through the pandemic, was we already had a group of people, including some of our kids and their friends, that we already connected with beforehand. And that's who we dove into during these 2 years. So this whole element of relationships and connecting with people, and not ignoring the very need that's right in front of you in the singles arena, It's something that I don't want you just to tap into it because it can grow your church. I'm not concerned about that. I want you to tap into it because you're being Jesus to people.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
So here you are, you have the opportunity today. You're sitting at coffee with one of the folks listening to the podcast. And again, most of our folks are small and mid-sized church leaders. You're sitting at coffee and you have an opportunity to share with them what is a word of wisdom or advice or encouragement that you would share with anyone listening today as we kind of go to the end of the podcast.
Now, I was thinking about this yesterday a lot, and I would just say, I think it's so easy to play the compare game, and you're going to lose always. And the compare game is not necessarily even the next church over that seems to be going well, or whatever the social media posts that the church is doing. We compare to what we used to think was successful, right? Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. Jesus' successful ministry was that he poured into, 11 people that carried
12,
on his
one didn't make it.
Right. He poured, and I think that's a good lesson. I was just reading the Great Commission to our team on Tuesday, and it's really interesting. We always read that go into the world and make disciples of every nation, but we don't read the part before it, which says he told them to meet on a mountain. They all came and they worshiped him, but it says, and some doubted.
Yes. Even
like
then,
he's literally casting a vision to some doubters.
He just raised from the dead.
Right. So don't get discouraged because you're running against opposition or you don't feel like things are going the way. I would just say, keep building those relationships, just like Jesus did. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going to be peaks and valleys. Keep building them. We're playing a long game, not a short game.
Dan, this has been so amazing. One of the things that the Lord has shown me, I've struggled with this my whole life, but as I turned 60 back in June, is that he's not in a hurry. He's just not in a hurry. He can do more in our lives in one day than we can do in 1,000 years.
That's right.
And so that's been exciting. I am so thankful. I think this has been one of the best podcasts we've ever had. I'm just telling you, because we are talking about something that needs to be dealt with. And again, it's about loving and caring for your sheep. If you're a pastor, it's about, and again, if you're entrepreneurial, this is an opportunity to grow and minister to people to a very large segment. And I guarantee in most of your communities that are listening right now, there's no one that's got a vibrant, living, ministry oriented singles ministry happening. If they have, about it. And so I want to make Dan available to you. I'm going to have his email, the book, everything you have available. We'll put that in the show notes. But I just want to thank you for who you are. I want to thank you that you had allowed the Lord to take something that I'm assuming you never thought would ever happen in your life. And most, he's so good at this, taking things the enemy meant for harm and turn it for good.
That's right.
He took
my
heart, man.
My biggest mistake and made it my platform of ministry. And it's crazy.
And only Jesus can do that. And so pastors and leaders that are listening, please reach out to Dan. And Dan, I want to have you back on again in the future just to try to talk through some of these things. But I want to consider you to be a resource for us too, as well, so that we can help pastors and help leaders minister. Thank you so much for your time today.
I love it.
Joining me and for helping us all to understand the people out there in Sacramento are pretty good people.
We're somewhat normal, other than the blue hair, right?
You did get to come hang out in North Carolina, so that probably helped you a little bit.
I loved getting out in your country. It's just some of the most beautiful parts of the world, right over there in North Carolina in those hills.
Well, I feel the same thing about California because I've seen some beautiful places there. Thank you again for joining us.
Yep. God bless everyone.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.